What's going on, everyone? It is that time of the season where we're going to talk about some cards that are going to probably get better for set 4. Now, there's a lot of cards in Star Wars Unlimited, and there's actually starting to become too many to really consider. So I decided to lower the scope a little bit. And we're going to be talking about some rares or legendaries that may be not only things that get better, but also because they're rares and legendaries, probably be rising in price if they become options that you'll want in set 4. I want to say a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you for joining me and playing in the weekly tournament that we got. It's been a lot of fun. And also, I have a TCG player link in the description down below if you want to pick up any of the cards today. Let's dive into our first one. Now, some of these on the list are going to be ones that you know and love and are already pretty good. And some of these are going to be, well, maybe looking to break into some sideboard slots or main deck slots. Triple Dark Raid is definitely the former. Any sort of space deck is going to be running Triple Dark Raid, assuming you're in Cunning and Villainy. Although space decks in Villainy generally are running Cunning because of Triple Dark Raid. You got amazing 6-cost plays such as Fet's Fire Spray and the Ruthless Raider that come out very frequently. But come set 4, we're going to get new additions, even fitting into that archetype, such as Devastator, for example, which is going to be an amazing very top end card that can completely finish out a game, as well as some more space units in general that look really good to go ahead and, as a secondary option compared to Ruthless Raider or Fet's Fire Spray, or maybe even a little bit early on, things like the smaller Fet's Fire Spray, or even some other space units that are going to be showing up. Basically, we're going to get more vehicles, and more importantly, we're going to get more space vehicles. And because a lot of these decks that are in Cutting Villainy and built around this card are space decks, this just is going to get more options, and it's going to get better options, and that's just going to make it more strong. Not very, I guess you could say, unique, and not exactly a difficult thought process. It's just going to get better because the cards that it already works with, you're going to get more options for those cards, and you're going to make, well, that deck ideally stronger due to more synergies from set 4. Next one up we've got is Traitorous. This is one that's kind of been in and out, definitely a strong card, no doubt about it. And in some matchups, it is just absolutely devastating. And a lot of decks still to this day are playing 1 to 2 copies or even some in the sideboard. Obviously, if you're taking things like Super Laser Technician in the current meta or cards that just can go ahead and trade or trade up with opposing units already, it's good. However, come set 4, we're going to be seeing a lot of things like pilots, and we're going to be seeing a lot of more space focused decks. And one of the big things about Traitorous is when you're taking 3 cost or less units, oftentimes they aren't going to be able to trade up into bigger units if your opponent has them. But what you'll notice about a lot of the space strategies is a lot of them have a very high concentration of 3 resource plays. Take Jango Fett, you've got TIE Phantoms, you've got things like Punishing One, you've got 7th Fleet Defenders, you've got P-38s. That's just Jango, right? Any sort of space strategy or decks that are going to be looking to bump up their space game plan, Traitorous is going to look for those cards and have a lot of targets. Not to mention, you're going to get pilots in the mix, and as soon as you're going ahead and taking those space units and attaching pilots to them, suddenly Traitorous gets even stronger, especially in those scenarios where you can potentially annihilate an entire opponent's space force just by taking 1 unit. But that's not all that it can do. It's also still solid already, so you have a good baseline that looks like it can potentially get even better in the upcoming set 4. Next one up is going to be Now There Are Two of Them, and this one's a little bit of a freebie because I believe this card is just going to get better and better as more sets come out. This, as we've seen with Cad Bane Red, is exceptionally strong. The ability to play a 5 resource play on turn 2 is extremely powerful. And one of the reasons why we haven't seen like Sabine Yellow be introduced and playing this extremely powerful combination is because the other 5 resource plays just aren't able to be played with the current amount of traits that we have on turn 1. Underworld decks with Bosk and Zuckuss as 5 resource plays have a plethora of turn 1 Underworld options. If you think about some of the other 5 resource plays like Poe Dameron or Plo Koon, for example, We have 0 resistance options on turn 1 for Podameron, and we have few options for Plo Koon that you actually want to play. Not to say that we're going to get a ton of options with this new set, as it seems to be more of a space-focused set, but any at all new options on turn 1, even though some of those will be vehicle units in of themselves, as long as they have the tag, we are still able to play those important 5 resource plays on turn 2. Heck, if you get more underworld vehicles, this could get even better in things like Cad Bane as well. As long as we get more traits with a kind of nice spread of them, we will be getting, now there are 2 of them, a little bit of a buff, because it's going to be able to synergize with those 5 resource plays that we already have. As I've said many times when talking about this card, we don't want to be playing bad cards to make our good cards better. And so if you are forced to play bad 1 resource or 2 resource plays on turn 1 to make now there are 2 of them work, you've kind of lost the power of now there are 2 of them, because now you've made your deck worse, which negates the strength of now there are 2 of them. And so far, we've been talking about some pretty strong cards already in the meta, and this one is no exception. Before we dive into some ones that are a little bit less popular as of right now, Millennium Falcon, 3 resource space unit immediately readied up. That is incredibly strong, especially in a set that has a whole slew of pilots to upgrade onto the Millennium Falcon. It will turn in Millennium Falcon from this 3/4 immediately readied up space unit to potentially a 5/5, even with just a single resource pilot. With 4 resources, or if you're playing in Wedge, just the Millennium Falcon plus that pilot can turn this into a 3/4 readied up immediately that can kill space units and not die, or just attack their base for a lot, to a, as I said, 5/5, or even bigger unit immediately readied up to kill a space unit, not die, or just hit their base for massive amounts of damage. It is extremely strong to be able to have an immediately readied up unit, and Millennium Falcon, being as cheap as it is, can really combo with a lot of the pilots to immediately get a ton of damage in and a ton of value in. Evidence of the Crime. This is the first one that starts off our list as a rare that could definitely see some improvement. This is one of those events that when it happens and when you're able to have the situation where you're pulling a Jedi lightsaber and putting it onto your own unit, it is incredibly powerful. The problem is that it's extremely niche. It is extremely niche. So at most, I could see this being an amazing sideboard card, and that's where I see it potentially being, especially with the new set. What we're going to see is a lot of pilots out. Now, it's important to note that we have costs on the cards, and so a lot of the cheap pilots will fit under this sort of 3-cost upgrade, and you may be able to move it around. And that is the strength of this. Having something like a Nian, or something like a Dagger Squadron pilot, or something of that nature, being able to be pulled, or Anakin Skywalker, pulled from one of your opponent's vehicles and attaching it to your own, could be very strong. Of course, you need to be in a spot where you are playing vehicles of your own, and your opponent are playing some sort of upgrade, but, well, pilots in that case. But that could be a very powerful sideboard card if we're seeing pilots be this powerhouse that, well, at least some of us hope that they are. Cobb Vanth's got to be the next one up, and this one is mainly because of Thrawn. I view Thrawn as one of the biggest potential leaders in the entire game. This is a leader that I could see being one of the best leaders as we get more and more cards. And cards like Cobb Vanth, I could see being the cause of that. I've already been playing Thrawn quite a bit, and heck, you might have seen, I believe, some opponents in some of the videos, although I can't remember if I was recording during those games or if I was just playing just for fun. But playing against and playing as Thrawn, a bunch of cards really showing their power, and Cobb Vanth has been one of them. Now, one of the biggest issues with this card is the fact that, well, you kind of have to get it killed on your terms. And, well, if you build a deck around that strategy, which is what Thrawn is trying to do, or you're just able to trade it off early, be able to get 2 cards from your when defeated trigger is absolutely amazing. And again, this is one of those cheap when defeated cards that really have some potential, because again, with Thrawn, you're getting new cards from set 4 that are 2-cost cards Think Director Krennic, and I forget the name, but that new TIE fighter at 2 costs that you can pull from the top of your deck that you really want in Thrawn. It just kind of adds all together. Heck, we even have Inferno 4 that'll fit in that type of deck. This is all about that when defeated trigger, and I could definitely see it becoming really, really powerful. And we talked a lot about pilots so far, but one thing we haven't talked about, which is the other sort of new mechanic coming with the new set, is indirect damage. Now, indirect damage is a very strong mechanic. If you are going that aggressive route, it can do some massive, massive things where your opponents have all their units damaged and they're still taking damage. However, that leads these types of cards, It Binds All Things, a kind of gateway into being a really strong potential. If you think about some of the cards or some of the decks rather, like Anakin Blue or Rey Red, where you have a lot of force units just naturally. Yodas, you've got Kanans, you've got potentially Reys, you've got Anakins even sometimes, not often. You've got Kiadis, Obi-Wans, Lukes, all that type of stuff. Not saying that in the later stages this is going to be amazing, but at least in the early game when you have those Yodas, when you have those Kanans, and they're playing indirect damage over there, or just cards that maybe deal a few damage here, a few damage there, you can start stacking them up on a single unit. And mind you, you don't have to have a force unit, but healing 3 damage in general is going to get a little bit more valuable. Healing damage in general is going to get a little bit more valuable because of indirect damage. But if you do happen to have those force units, which is where I think this card really shines, this turns into a 2 resource event that not only heals your unit to add more indirect damage to it, which kind of heals your base in the indirect damage matchup, which is really important, but it also will potentially kill an opponent's unit on top of that, which is really, really strong. And this is a card where it's seen a little bit of play here and there. It's just a matter of getting the situation where your unit has that 3 damage on it and your unit hadn't died already is a lot more difficult. In set 4, it will be a lot easier. Speaking of cards that might get a little bit better because of indirect damage, we've got Rey. Now, this is a card that's seen a decent amount of play in things like Anakin Blue, Rey Red. Not that it's been like a full 3 of and absolutely insane. In some decks, you aren't playing it, but I've seen it quite frequently as like a 1 or 2 of, where in that situation where you're able to maybe get a shield token or just heal up a little bit damage and have a 4/7 force unit that will probably survive most things, it could be quite strong. Now, one of the things about this is the heal 2 damage from a unit on attack can sometimes be good and sometimes be kind of useless. In a game where there's a lot of indirect damage, this on attack trigger, again, as I mentioned with It Binds All Things, kind of turns into Restore 2, because that indirect damage can be directed towards Rey, and then you may go ahead and heal up that damage, which can be really, really strong. And I think overall, that can be good. But also, we're going to get more cards that are non-heroism units that you can fit in your decks. And we're going to get some, hopefully, more value for our force units because of things like It Binds All Things getting a little bit stronger. So I can see Rey being a little bit more interesting for some of those decks. But most importantly, this on attack to heal 2 damage is going to get a little bit stronger, and I think healing in general is going to get a little bit stronger. This next one seems to be a pretty obvious one in a set that's going to be mainly focused on space units, but that is Swoop Down, this event that allows you to transcend the arena boundaries and get your space units into attacking their ground units. This is one of those events that gives you a little bit of interaction with your units when you're going all space, or mostly space. And one of the cool things about this is with space units and pilots, this Swoop Down, because your space units are now really big, actually do have the ability to kill some of the bigger units on their side of the battlefield. One of the things with Swoop Down so far is that if you're playing something like Django, which some decks are running 1 or 2 of these Swoop Downs, and sometimes they're not running any of them, but one of the tricky parts is when you have things like P-38 or you have things like 7th Fleet. Well, for one, you don't want to get any damage to 7th Fleet because they have a shield token. And sometimes that 5 power isn't enough to kind of kill something. If you do have like a Millennium Falcon with a pilot on it, suddenly this is going to be probably hitting for like 7. And that is a massive amount of damage to where you can kill a lot more things, including leaders, which will give you a new dynamic inside these games. And for our last one, we have Val. Now, this is definitely one of those ones where I am more just hoping that it's going to be really cool and really fun and really strong. But certainly, as you start talking about more and more rares and legendaries, there are less and less that are specifically looking to get better for set 4. Of the ones that I mentioned before, I think those ones are looking to get better and will probably get better. But Val here is more of just, is Thrawn going to be someone that really wants this card? Now, Bounty, deal 3 damage to a unit, still applicable. But now you can potentially double up this when defeated trigger to give 4 experience tokens to a friendly unit, and that is insane, especially if you're the one that is able to control that initial bounty. You know, you trade this in or attack into something that's bigger, you get that bounty down. And let's just, for an example, throw this out. I know someone else threw this out earlier when I was mentioning Thrawn. A lot of people commented about the Hylobon Enforcer. So Hylobon Enforcer starts as a 1/4. Right? For 1 resource. You get down Val, she dies. Let's say you deal the 3 damage to Hylobon Enforcer. It's now a 4/1. But now we get to go ahead and add 4 experience tokens to Hylobon Enforcer. Hylobon Enforcer then turns into an 8/5 with grit, which means any additional damage will get even more power. An 8/5. So let's say turn 1 you play your Hylobon. Let's say you play Hylobon Enforcer plus a 1 resource play, or a Hylobon Enforcer plus Hylobon Enforcer. Or maybe even turn 2, you do that with turn 1 being Val. If you follow it up with something like a Merciless Contest, removing your opponent's unit and being able to control the Val kill, or you trade Val into it, you're going to get that massive Hylobon Enforcer and potentially end games really quickly. Not saying that's going to be an impressively amazing strategy. There might be some other better grit options that we have, and you don't really necessarily want to be playing Hylobon Enforcer. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that deck makeup will look like. I'm not sure what when defeated triggers will get with the rest of set 4. All I'm saying is that that is an extremely powerful option and has interesting implications for Thrawn and for set 4, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the rest of the set. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think things like, you know, Swoop Down, Ray, It Binds All Things, are we going to see more space focus? Are we going to see indirect damage actually pop off to where these cards are going to be good? What about Cobb Vanth, guys? Thrawn? I know a lot of you are excited about Thrawn already. I know I am most excited about Thrawn out of any of the other leaders that we've talked about, just because of the potential he has. And then what about the other cards? Evidence of the Crime, upgrades. Is this going to actually have a target, an option? And of course, some of the other ones that are already good. We already know they're going to be good, already going to be decently expensive to pick up now, but maybe they will get even better as we see more decks pop up with set 4 focused on these space strategies, maybe piloting, or maybe you can combo with now there are 2 of them. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you all for a video tomorrow.